Hello, welcome back to another episode of Somewhere Between a Film and TV podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Parra, and number one, thank you so much for listening and watching. Number two, if you could, please down below, like, comment, subscribe. Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein, the 2025 version. What did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. Remember, everything we review here will always have full spoilers. I know that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a very old book. It's also been adapted like a million times. But there are, of course, changes. Maybe even you're a person that doesn't know the origins of the book itself, Frankenstein. If you don't know the actual story itself, this is your first introductory thing to it. You know what? Hey, still, spoiler alert. Everything we review here will have full spoilers. Also, it doesn't come out on Netflix for another week, so maybe you haven't seen it yet. But as for everyone else, you got to see it early in a theater, much like myself. Stick around. We're going to get into it, but go ahead and like this, save it for later. As for everyone else, let's move on. Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein. What is it about? A brilliant but egotistical scientist brings a monstrous creature to life in a daring experiment that ultimately leads to the undoing of both the creator and his tragic creation. Again, every time we read the description, it's a little bit vague, but that's okay. I get why they do that. It's definitely what it's about, right? But outside of that, with this movie, you can probably tell I'm pretty excited to be talking about it. Did I love it? Did I hate it? Or am I somewhere between on it? Well, it's pretty great. I loved it. I loved it a lot. I think that this is one of the best movies of the year. I think that if you have been around the show long enough, you know that I also happen to teach literature. So this is one of those things where maybe there's a bit of a bias here towards this type of material, but I could tell just from the seams bursting alone from watching this from frame one that this very much feels like a passion project of Guillermo Del Toro's. Even if you're aware of his filmography in terms of what he likes to lean into with his movies, he does always take a specific type of liking to trying to understand the misunderstood. That there is a lot of deep empathy for monsters, for things that give one impression one way and then end up another by the time you learn the story that you need to learn about them. Honestly, that's even how this movie's structured, so it can prove that point. At the very beginning, when we're first introduced to Jacob Elordi's Frankenstein's monster, that's a mouthful, but the monster, we don't really see him in his full makeup or anything. He's got this big cloak over him. He's starting to throw all of these people that are working on the ship around. You can see that he's beating them like bloody. He's able to break their bones very easily while he's on the hunt for Victor. And the setup of it, from what I understand, is much like the novel, where it's told in this kind of flashback structure where the primary storytelling mechanic here is that Victor is on the boat telling this story to this captain, and then eventually the monster shows up and he's like, oh, he told you his version of the story. How about an understanding of where I come from? Which honestly, at first I thought it was going to be like a Rashomon thing, where I thought that he's going to be like, oh, he was so bad to me. He was all this and that. But no, I got to be honest, like Oscar Isaac's character was pretty honest about being a dickhead throughout the entire thing. Because let's really try and narrow it down a little bit about what I liked, what I loved, and everything from there. So I think that the story here is really interesting to me, because diving deep into the theme itself, Frankenstein is also called the modern Prometheus because it's about this idea of gaining the immortal, learning about having this sort of freedom, this liberation from your creator as well, which is partially what that's about. But it's also about Victor having his loved one sort of ripped from him when he was younger. I think that there's a lot of interesting psychological stuff in terms of Oscar Isaac's character Victor to his mom, because his mom is also played by Mia Goth early on, and he ends up falling in love with a woman who looks just like his mom, also played by Mia Goth. And you're kind of like, what is exactly that tying into? And he definitely has some specific issues with his mom that he ties into about that, where he like misses her to a certain extent, so much that he like, if he sees someone that resembles her, he's going to fall in love with her to an extent. Also, there's an interesting additional detail that he only ever drinks milk when he's on the screen, which kind of shows a bit of like a stunted development to me. Obviously, you know, a parallel to when you drink milk when you're young and a baby. And I thought that was really interesting because he ends up kind of being this like, not man child, but he has a very overgrown ego about himself. I think it's kind of daring that this movie, for the first, I would say half of it, has a main character that grows increasingly unlikable as it goes along, because you are sort of on his side in the sense of like, you want to see him get to the point where he gets the monster made. You want to see him have all of that, because we know where the story's headed. And I also like that this movie took its time to eventually get to that, because a bit more of an impatient movie might have gotten straight into the Frankenstein's monster stuff and maybe might have played into the whole monster bit of it even more so. But no, this one, I thought it practiced a restraint. It really, when the monster shows up, and Jacob Elordi's in it a lot, don't get me wrong, I think though that the patience to get there I thought was very, very strong, because you end up spending a lot of the first, I would say, act of it. I really don't know how this movie's structured in terms of time. I could not tell you at all. I just know that I got transported into this world, and it really felt like it was going at its own level, at its own pace. It felt like it was a pure, unrestrained director vision from beginning to end in terms of how it was telling its story. And I had absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. So we are introduced to Victor in his younger life, and he's sort of, and I like this a lot because it does establish the overall overarching themes of the entire movie, is that from the very beginning, Victor has like these parental issues. He has a mom that was ripped from him straight away when he was younger, and he has this kind of vindictive energy for his father, because he's like, I know that you were the smartest doctor alive, because you teach me every day, you taught me everything. I know that you probably didn't give it your all in terms of saving her. And he's like, that's a lie, I did everything I could. And that's sort of up to interpretation to me whether or not he did or he didn't. Part of you might align with the fact that, since it is told from Victor's perspective, that that's probably the case, that he didn't. But we also know that we're being told this by a really arrogant, really egotistical man. And I mean, he's very open and honest about the fact that he's egotistical, which I liked a lot. I think that it's funny that we have a main character who is very aware of his own weaknesses as a person. But he doesn't consider them weaknesses, more than likely, because there's even a moment where he's talking to Mia Goth where they're introduced to each other at like a dinner table scene, and Mia Goth is saying something, and she's like, you can't just believe in that and expect like, the outcome that you want. And then he's like looking at her like, oh, he's like, tell me more. And then he's kind of being like a dickhead about it and sort of prying her to acknowledge that. It's very much like that sort of argumentative type of person that's like, oh, you're gonna tell me that I'm wrong, then like tell me why I'm wrong. And it's like a rage baity thing. But from there on, then his relationship with his father is very interesting to me. It is the parallel that we're seeking, that it's one of the more, I don't really mind if symbolism is obvious. I think that this story and the way that it's told, there's no issue with that. I don't see why we would sometimes need things to be maybe a little bit less overt. If it's going for a very in-your-face type of messaging, then hey, why not? And I think that this wasn't even in your face in the sense of like spelling out the theme. I think that this is such a visual storytelling mechanic-based movie that I didn't mind any of that at all. But we see that when Victor is young, that at first, he has this relationship with his father where he's learning these things from him, and then we notice that he's ends up, if he gets a question wrong, he'll get like this thing that he has in his hand, the father, he'll like smack him in the face. He's like, no, we're not gonna hit your hands anymore because your hands are necessary for being a doctor. He's like, but your face is vanity. And so he starts like scarring him from there. And of course, naturally, that's going to be a specific relationship that carries on throughout the entire movie, because what I ended up really liking from there is because Oscar Isaac as Victor is portraying this with a kind of desperate quality to him. Not desperate in the sense of like, oh, he's weak, oh, he's fragile, anything. He's the opposite of fragile. Like his ego is so not fractured at all. His is more like, you can tell that he lost his mom at an early age and he was stuck with his father, and he ended up not being able to learn any kind of parental guidance from there. He's only ever seen it modeled one way. But achieving that idea of eternal life, of achieving life itself, is the greatest, like the grandest accomplishment that he could possibly think of. And he's able to display it in this very early on scene where it's this like amazing prosthetic. It's probably, what's the word? An animatronic, where he's interacting with this ligament system that's like pieced together, like cobbled together. It's really gross and gory, but it's really well done because it's like exasperating and breathing for air. And there's this kind of haunting quality to it too. And there's something just very macabre about the whole thing, where he's interacting with it and he like tosses this apple back and forth and he's displaying this apple. And I think that this is one of those things where, yes, you could say that it's a very showy scene within the movie itself, but it's necessary because it is the overall overarching introduction to him that we need. Because you see how arrogant he is right off the bat. You see that he's very self-congratulatory, but he also understands where this drive comes from. He says that this apple represents life, and all of this comes from the extent of, you can tell this ties all the way back to whenever his mother had passed away, and the fact that it feels like he's chasing life not for the sake of being able to just say that he was able to overcome it. That's definitely part of it, but you could tell that the drive came from the fact that he lost his mother. I feel like a lot of this movie, it definitely ties into him having mommy issues for sure, and then having daddy issues because of it later, which ends up being this replication later whenever the monster itself comes into play. And Jacob Elordi as the monster, get this out of the way right now. If I wouldn't have known who that was, I believe it was supposed to be Andrew Garfield beforehand, which is interesting because I think he is one of my favorite working actors, but Jacob Elordi not only gives a really, really great performance under the makeup in terms of like facial features and being able to convey sadness in his eyes, but I think another thing on top of that is he is very grand in terms of his stature. He's like 6'5". He's very lean. He's got a really long torso, and I'm surprised that he was never the choice from the very beginning because he has those qualities to him. I know that Guillermo Del Toro pays attention to stuff like that because of people like Doug Jones in the Hellboy movies as well. He's got an eye for that kind of thing. And I think that if I wouldn't have known who that was, I would have been like, who is this actor? Quite literally the entire time. And he gives a very committed physical presence as well, which is why I was so surprised that it was not him from the very beginning. But I will say, it's not just in terms of, it's not one of those performances like, let's say, I'm not trying to slight anybody or throw any random shade, but Gary Oldman in The Darkest Hour or something like that. It's not a performance that's carried specifically just by prosthetics. As a matter of fact, it's more like, as much as I hate this movie, it's more like Jim Carrey in The Grinch, where he's somehow able to display every single type of emotion in terms of humanity to you through all of that makeup, which is really impressive. I think that once it pivots into the monster, there's this really deep love and care and empathy that Guillermo Del Toro displays for all of his creatures in all of his movies, but you could tell that the foundation for probably his entire career, I bet, was founded off of the idea of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because the moments with him where he runs off, the setup that happens here is that he ends up running off from the castle. You know, it's this big kind of grandiose set piece. It's not an action movie or anything, but the bursts of action that are in this are really great. And it's this big thing where Oscar Isaac's like, everything is crumbling down, and it leads into the part two of whatever. And I love the performances here. I love the commitment to the accents and the ability to really display I wouldn't call this movie over the top, but it absolutely leans into itself. Whenever there's a moment really early on where the creature's pointing at him in this like specific type of way, he's like, "Bring me Victor." Like it's the best. It's so cool. And I love the commitment to everything here. And Jacob Elordi, like you can tell at the point from everything we'd seen from the perspective of the Doctor. And you can finally hear and see the very first when the creature is on the boat, and you can very much see the whole him like, oh, he told you his tale, I'm going to tell you mine now. And he's speaking like essentially perfect English, and you're like, it's an instant kind of hook in terms of storytelling, because you're like, how did he learn how to do that? I'm very curious where he left off, because Victor's perspective was very like getting fed up with him as a child, essentially, because he does end up trying to be a dad in a sense. And not only does he become his own father in terms of the ability to take care of the creature, he, in my personal opinion, becomes even worse than his father did. It's very much about, that's where the theme comes in, of this very obviously being about like the cyclical trauma that you develop from, or he developed from his parents growing up, and extending all of that hatred, all of that anger, all of the fury that comes from that into that, because this story does convey the feeling of frustration. It conveys the feeling of not being able to do something that you want to do, or not being able to have something that you want to have. And here, I think that Oscar Isaac is chasing this endless thing. If he accomplished what he wanted, Victor did. And then it ends up being like, well, okay, I did it. And then he almost immediately dismisses his own creation. He's like, well, I mean, it's like that sort of equivalent modern day. There's this whole discourse about whether or not people should be having kids, and this idea where they have kids for the aesthetic. And it's kind of funny because the theme here almost ties into like that sort of modern day discussion that we're having, because I think that themes are universal. Themes go on forever, in terms of being able to carry through about what things are about right now. Even though Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was written however long ago it was, a lot of the themes still pertain to right now even. And breaking down all the themes and stuff like that, I do think also it ends up, I saw a Letterboxd review I thought was funny, where it was like, whenever your parents start traumatizing you, so you start traumatizing them back, because the third act does land into this very long chase scene, and you can kind of piece together, it goes on for months, because Oscar Isaac's character starts it clean shaven, and then by the end he's got like a full-on beard, and you're just like, how long have they been going at this for? And I thought it was interesting. There's a line here, there's this whole thing, because Frankenstein's monster ends up like starting to hurt him back, like he starts like breaking his bones even, and stuff to that extent, where he's hurting him, and he's like, you only listen when I hurt you. And I think that's a really interesting sort of other theme that ties into the overall everything, where it's like, why do you only listen whenever it comes down to hurting you emotionally, hurting you physically? And I do think that's a commentary kind of on just parent dynamic or family dynamic even then. And there is a lot of stuff within the context of that, but I really want to transition into, I ended up talking so much about the themes of this because it's really strong, but I want to touch on the set pieces and the cinematography, literally everything. So Netflix did, they funded this, it's theirs. I sometimes complain about Netflix, but sometimes they do stuff like this where they throw an unlimited amount of money to a filmmaker, and it's like the best thing they do, and it's so cool that they do it sometimes. Like The Irishman is one of my favorite movies ever, and they did that for Martin Scorsese, and here they're doing it again for Guillermo Del Toro. It feels like a pure, unfiltered vision that somebody had, that it's interesting that you can tell that this was definitely his. It feels like his entire directorial style was basically matched for this specific story, which is why there's just this really kind of, there's this alchemy here. There's this almost like kind of magical thing for me in this movie that it really, really works. And so the set design is so grandiose. I think that there's so much in the background. I'm not saying that this is a con, but I almost got distracted because of how like beautiful the laboratory is, with its very large electric rods and all of this stuff in the background, where pays attention to the little details. The gore here is really specifically, like, I'm not saying that as like, because you know that I love gore if you've watched the show at all, but it's so inherent to the story itself. There'll be moments where he's like ripping the skin off and you can see the ligaments moving, and it's disgusting. It's I say it's like so cool, but it is. And the sort of mechanics of that, you can tell that it was definitely probably an animatronic of a sort, and like it just looked so real. And I think that it adds this additional layer of just you being really enamored and captured into the story. And I thought that just like the actors within the context of that, it all of the set design around them almost like towers over them, quite literally, because of the world that it wants to put you in. And I think that it's interesting. I know these aren't technically underrated movies, but I do think that initially when they had come out, we took them for granted. Were Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3 specifically. And this set design, of all things, reminded me of that a little bit. Like Gore Verbinski type stuff. I could also see Gore Verbinski probably making a Frankenstein type movie, because the commitment to the creatures, to the ability to transport you into different world, animatronics, really, really utilizing, if you were doing CG at all, it feels so tangible and so real because it's mixed in with real world aesthetic stuff. And this movie felt like something that would have come out 20 years ago, in the sense that stuff like this was coming out all the time, and we were definitely taking it for granted then. And now we have another one that is so, I can't believe, I'm glad that Netflix gave it a theatrical run for like a couple weeks, but this is a thing that needs to be seen as big as possible because it's made as big as possible. The story itself, I think the reason why it works so well for me is because, yes, the themes are there, like I said. The set design is so big in terms of the setting, and I thought it was honestly going to probably be not darker in tone, but darker in cinematography. And I think that parts of it are, for sure, but I thought it was going to all take place at like night for some reason. But I think that a lot of it, and I'll get into why I think that is in a second, is brighter in the sense that I thought it was like really gorgeously shot. And there's one scene that utilizes the golden hour out in the Arctic, where you can see the monster in the middle, like in the forefront, like one perfect shot type stuff, and you just see the silhouette of him, while Oscar Isaac's character Victor is like looking straight on, and he's just isolated in the world around him, because at that point in the story he's chasing a companion. He's saying, I don't need to be vindictive anymore. I'm not even trying to be vengeful. I just want a companion. I just want somebody to be able to spend life with, or have a friend, because the whole spirit of the forest segment of the movie, where he goes off into the forest, he ends up, he lives in their walls, and he meets this older man that is essentially the crux of the catalyst, like everything that the movie ends up wanting to say in the second half. It's so like languid, and it's so beautiful in terms of just the simplicity of it all. A monster making a friend. And he ends up feeling his face at a point. It's a very quiet moment the older man does that's blind. And he thinks that he's like battle scarred. And in a sense he is. I mean, it's one of the more like obvious types of symbolism, where it's like, oh, you have fought your own battles in the past to get to this point. And naturally they set up the thing with the wolves so you can see it coming, and it ends up being a very emotional moment where the creature was gone, and you know where it's going from here. The family that he was observing, that he saw the picture perfect version of a family to be raised with, where there was no sort of trauma to be extended upon from there, that they were learning and encouraging each other, like, you know, something that Victor probably needed to hear sometimes. Like, good job, great job on like learning these words and learning this and learning that. And he ends up being the naturally most emotional and most caring person in the entire movie. And yes, of course, it is his story. It's Victor's to an extent. Victor is more in the first half, and then we know that it's definitely more about the creature overall in terms of the lessons here. But the whole idea that there's another great set piece where the monster fights off all these wolves, and I thought like he like starts skinning them, and I was like, this is crazy. And all of that, I think, like the action here when it happens, I mean, it's moderate. It's not the point of the movie, but it's there, and it's really well done because it's there, and it really makes a specific strike and impression because he is so, you get to the point at that point in the story, he's so empathetic. He's so, in terms, like, you care for him so much that you forget to an extent that, oh right, he can possibly be that strong, be that, like, you know, in terms of the urgency, be really like able to tear things apart. But that's how you know it's not in his nature. His nature was just to be an empathetic creature overall. And so he just wanted a friend. That's the thing he says. You are a friend. And it's what he ends up seeking in the latter half of the movie. Final half of the movie. And I thought that was so brilliant. And I think that the cinematography also, like I said, I was worried about it a little bit because Netflix sometimes, yeah, they give you money and stuff, but there's like this weird digital sheen their stuff has sometimes. And it was missing in this. I thought that Guillermo Del Toro really got to utilize he's got specific quirks in terms of being a filmmaker. Like I feel like he utilizes a lot of wide angle lenses so he can make things feel bigger and wider than even initially they are, which works really well in terms of the castle setting here, because where they're at feels very, very big. And I also really liked the small touches of humor that are in this, because there are moments that I thought were very funny. Like Christoph Waltz has this one moment where he notices that Oscar Isaac definitely takes a liking to his niece, and he kind of gives this like side eye at a point, and then he like pees in a toilet and like makes him flush it, and you're like, what is what is going on? And you end up realizing later that what I liked a lot about this as well is that Oscar Isaac's character is kind of like a sociopath, because he ends up like murdering him. And it's the one thing where I was like, did they just kind of like think that he died? Because then there's a later thing where the Mia Goth's character is getting married, and then like they're just not there anymore, and I was like, they just assumed that he went off and died somewhere or something. But if they mention that at all, let me know in the comments. I'm not saying that as a slight or anything. It was one of those things where I was like, did they address that? But overall, I thought that this was just a brilliant movie in terms of, I teared up. You will tear up if the emotions land on its wavelength. There's some stuff I've heard some people say that I don't necessarily agree with, that it's not emotional enough, that they felt like it was very like, yeah, it's beautiful and grand, but it's very like flat in terms of emotions, which I can't get on that critique, because I thought that this was a very moving story. There's the moment alone that I would show to people in isolation is when the monster's out in the wilderness and he's feeding this deer, and he's like just has this happy face, and then these hunters end up shooting the deer in front of him, and like from there it's just so sad. And I think that the entire, core of the movie could be described in that scene alone. Like you would instantly get what this was about just from that. And yeah, of course, I mean, I don't mind dialogue that's overt if the dialogue already had been like that. Like if you spell out the themes for me, then I'm hoping that your dialogue was already on that wavelength, because I was watching something I agree with recently where I'm glad that Netflix didn't do any of their normal interfering in terms of, how they do that second screen thing where they say that the characters in their shows have to repeat dialogue over and over because they know that people are going to be on their phones while they're watching something ridiculous. I know, but it happens, which is why they'll explain and spell out things over and over and over. And here, there's only like one singular moment that's even like that, and it's just whenever they're telling Victor, you're the monster, but that ties into the movie itself, so I don't have any issue with that in particular at all. But it was that, and then I hear that some people have an issue with the monster forgiving Victor in the end. And my thing about that is, I don't mind it, because I think that the monster had already been portrayed with so much empathy, so much care and understanding, that if he wants to forgive Victor, that's more than okay. I think that the resolution there, that he ends up being the one to overcome the idea of vengeance and the idea of being overall all consumed by chasing down the trauma, quite literally chasing him down, I thought worked really well. Because we don't have to forgive Victor. We can understand and still be upset about it. But the monster himself, to make that choice, to go over that, to overcome his own... I like that humanity. He does still have emotions. Like, very much, you're going to be born. You're not going to be, like, a perfect person. But he's a very caring and very kind to the world. He sees the beauty in absolutely everything type of person. And I thought that his forgiveness of him was very great. Oscar Isaac's character, saying I'm sorry at the end, I think he meant it. If he didn't at that point, he was honestly at the end, you could tell that whenever on the boat early on in the movie, he's like, if he comes here, like, just give him to me. Just give me him, like, or give me up to him. At that point, he was like, I'm out. I'm over this. I'm done. I'm out. Like, you do not have to, I fucked up. Is basically like what he was getting at. And I ended up thinking that the emotional resolution, I thought, worked really well for me. And overall, yes, I have so many positive things to say about this. I feel like this one I ended up talking even more about the themes than I typically do, but that's not to say that everything else about this isn't perfect. It's got gorgeous cinematography. I love the way this story's told. I think that it's going to get I hope it's going to get so many nominations in terms of Academy Awards for, like, I would say Oscar Isaac, definitely Jacob Elordi, best director, best, I would say, maybe adapted screenplay there too, but best, like, a lot of technical stuff as well. We're at that point where I think that I saw this and I agree with it. Is this the best year for movies since 2019 in the past, like, decade or so? I think so. And we're not even done with the year yet. And I'm super excited for stuff like Marty Supreme still as well. But overall, if you didn't know where I was headed with this, I've got no negatives. I have absolutely nothing negative to say about this other than it sucks that it's getting a Netflix release. But also, I'm very grateful to Netflix that they gave Guillermo Del Toro an unlimited amount of money to make this. So, yes, my score is yet another 5 out of 5. What a great year. What a very cool year for stuff. I love this so much. Have you seen Frankenstein yet? Are you excited for it? If you listen to this whole thing and you're a book reader and you're like, I know the story, so I'm going to watch this. What did you think of Frankenstein? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. Again, a 5 out of 5 from me. What a great movie. I loved it. It'll move you. Hopefully it will. And up next is Begonia. And sorry guys, where I'm at right now, it's not here yet, but I know it's here next week. And it was very frustrating when they do limited release and I have to wait forever for something. But it's coming, I promise. I've heard it's amazing. That, as well as Predator Badlands, which I am looking forward to. I wanted to see how that turns out. But in order to see those and keep up, please subscribe. Again, what did you think of Frankenstein? Let me know down below. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.